Hello, friends. So, it's been another week. Time for another RebelKitty Report. This is the RebelKitty Report for the week of March 18th, 2024.
Why are you gay?
Alright, so I'd like to start off with one of the stories that we've been kind of covering, one of the closest so far on this channel, and that's the death of student Nex Benedict in Owasso, Oklahoma. And a number of things have come out in the past few weeks, and I know I have made posts about them and some shorts and stuff, but just to kind of keep everyone up to speed, the police released autopsy results from their toxicology report and announced that it was a combination of the chemical compounds of Prozac and Benadryl that basically caused a toxic reaction which ended Nex's life. And so while that is preliminary, those autopsy reports have been forwarded to the district attorney and are awaiting, whether or not their charges will be pressed or what's going to happen from here. But it's expected that on March 27th, so in about 9 days' time, there should be a full report released. Many folks have kind of criticized the medical report as being a bit lacking in detail. So, but there will be more forthcoming. Another kind of interesting or critique or note in the autopsy, it was the mix of medications again was Prozac and Benadryl. The Advocate, a news website, reached out to Dr. Joshua King from the Maryland Poison Center at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, and Dr. Masha Yemitz, of the toxicology fellow at the same university, to ask them if this was fairly common, if these were reactive medications, or kind of what their opinions on this was. And I found it kind of elucidating that, they point out that the odds of causing a toxic reaction are quite low. These are like kind of frequently used medications, and it would circumstances that would cause someone to die would be would have to involve some fairly significant underlying factors. Although Yemitz in particular makes some interesting points that whenever poison centers are called, there's something that was found on the scene or something that was reported by the family member, caregiver, the patient themselves, which elucidates that there had been exposure or ingestion. And I kind of noticed this as well in all this reporting, that to me it seems a bit odd that the family would not state that that was part of the cause, or at least corroborate that information. Or it seems like an odd detail that's thrown in, because in order to actually die from those medications, you would have to consume a pretty significant quantity, and then the death itself wouldn't necessarily be instant. There would be there's intense hallucinations, convulsions, and all manners of behavior that I feel like a first responder and medical personnel would probably identify as some form of poisoning. And also, Yemitz points out that vast majority of these cases survive because, again, first responders can generally pinpoint that it's some form of ingestion. They can, do stomach pumps and things like this to eventually treat the individual at a high likelihood of survival. So it just seems like a very peculiar way if someone was to deliberately attempt to do such a thing. that would be very efficient, and that no one would really notice up until the toxicology report had to find this out. Like, to me, these details all seem a bit like scattered and not really, they don't really corroborate each other well. But again, I'll withhold final judgment until we have the end report and the concluded investigation. And something else I'd like to draw attention to: the family, via their attorney, released a statement this week explaining some of their concerns about this case and the investigation and the way it's being portrayed and covered, particularly with the autopsy results and how those were explained and delivered to the public. The family, in their statement, brings attention to several notable injuries that were found on Nex's body that would at least corroborate Nex's claim that they had been in a fight and perhaps the victim of a pretty serious attack, and details that seem to be overlooked in the autopsy report. If you remember, Lieutenant Nick Boatman of the Owasso Police Department officially stated that physical trauma was found not to be related to the cause of death, which that statement right there directly contradicts what the family releases in their statement, which shows that there were numerous contusions, numerous injuries, scars, healing wounds, and hemorrhaging that is consistent with having been in a fight. I pointed out in my community post it's called subgalcal hemorrhages, but basically essentially under the scalp area. And this is a result of hair pulling, particularly younger folks without the connective tissues all developed there. And I mean, that would be a pretty, especially as the age that Nex was, there'd have to be pretty substantial pulling to cause damage to that tissue. They list these injuries, and they kind of casually glossed over them as being any relevant, but they don't seem to be like they're pretty serious, and by all means they don't rule out the potential of a concussion or some kind of other underlying issues that could have happened. So I just thought this was rather curious. I think the family did the good thing by trying to release that information to the public and at least make both sides of the story told and made known. But I'm gonna say I'm a bit confused by the Owasso Police Department's candor throughout this investigation. They're very forthcoming with information, and yet at the same time they seem to, even in that initial interview from the very first interaction that the PD had with the victim, they seem to kind of disregard the whole case and that anything was serious. And I find that a bit bothersome. Even that the school didn't find it serious enough to call the police to begin with, until the family called the police. It's like this whole case screams some serious negligence, or just looking the other way, or not really taking kids seriously took place. Definitely problems. And should be noted that the Department of Education's federal investigation is still ongoing, and that is expected to possibly take months. So this initial investigation when Owasso is not done, and there's a federal one looking into potential civil rights violations involving a culture of bullying that many have reported in the Owasso school districts there. It's all very fascinating. It's like this story kind of every other day seems to have a little something that comes out. And while it's slow rolling and it will take months before we finally see the end of everything, just hang in there. I will keep bringing you updates. It's gonna be a wild ride, I think. It's a lot of interesting stuff happening around this case. Okay, and the next story I'd like to discuss, I've kind of been avoiding the whole Israel-Gaza conflict because that is heavily covered in the media, but I thought I'd take a chance to talk about an aspect of it that is woefully underreported and not discussed, but was exemplified in a story this past week. An Al Jazeera reporter, Ismail Al-Ghoul, was taken custody while he was reporting on the IDF raid in Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza. And apparently while he was in custody, was severely beaten. He was held for about 12 hours before he was finally returned. And unfortunately, his case is far from unique. I think it's pretty fair to say that in any conflict zone, there's going to be a large number of journalists and media workers that get hurt and killed. But something about this conflict has been very different. There is an active targeting and war on journalists that are attempting to report on the events. And it's very deeply concerning. But the Center for Protecting Journalists, the Committee for to Protect Journalists, reported that as of March 18th, so today, since October 7th, there have been about 95 journalists and media workers killed. And in addition to the 32,000 or so civilians that have died so far. It's pretty horrific numbers. To compare that just the few months of the Israel-Gaza war basically beat out the total number of reporters that were injured in the Ukraine conflict so far. Just dwarfed them, as well as the number of civilian casualties. And this is in an infinitesimally smaller geographic location. It seems that there is certainly a war on information. I've posted a few critiques on my channel in various videos of some intelligence releases and reports, and I get some of the most vicious and nasty comments about it. Way more so than on any other subject. And I think that really says a lot. There's certainly this conflict is more than just a war on a people. It is a war on public perception and a war on information. And I think it's all the more important to be stay critical. Don't just take things at face value, myself included. Always check your sources. It's why I provide things like that. And try to do your own research and don't just and trust your gut a little bit, because there's a lot of bull crap out there. Another story that might have flown under the radar for many that I think has some interesting ramifications and is something that we cover is conflict in Africa. But Niger has this past week announced that they are severing ties with the United States, particularly when it comes to the war against ISIS. Niger joins alongside Mali and Burkina Faso, their neighbors, in recent moves to get rid of both European and French forces, as well as end any kind of ties with the United States, which is a bit of an alarming trend. And these countries have instead been turning to Russia and China for support. The United States has accused them of doing this many times, especially in Niger. And it seems that this has finally come to a head. So we've seen throughout Africa a number of these sorts of situations take place where different countries are sort of allying themselves either with Russia and China or the United States and Europe. And it's almost like back at like the Africa campaigns of World War II. It's kind of reminiscent of that. You even have Ukrainians out there fighting Russians in random parts of Africa, like Mali, I think, was one of them. So it's getting pretty spicy there every day, and we'll definitely be keeping you posted as much as I can. And an interesting development in Iraqi Kurdistan that's kind of just breaking. But the Kurdish Democratic Party, which is currently led by Masoud Barzani, has decided to not participate in the regional parliamentary elections. So the Kurdistan region is its own region inside of Iraq, and they are given so many seats within parliament. And recently, the Iraqi government deemed that the quotas to hold a certain number of religious and ethnic minorities were unconstitutional and got rid of these quotas. And the Kurdistan Democratic Party is deciding to protest this. They have declared this is unconstitutional and illegal, and says that it threatens the sovereignty of the Kurdish people within the Kurdistan region, and has caused a bit of alarm in the United States State Department already. It seems that our longtime allies in the region are throwing a cog in the wrench of the electoral process there. Although there have been numerous changes in Iraq over the past few years that have been limiting the power and authority of the Kurdish people. So there is certainly a bit of a growing tension there. And the KDP decided that this is where they're going to make some form of stand by not participating in the local elections. We'll see how that turns out. I feel like that's kind of a risky play, because then what stops the Iraqi government from getting sympathetic people into office and then just moving on with their day? But the KDP is pretty big in the region, and I think will retain some significant level of control, or at least public support. The parliamentary election is set to take place in June 10th. So between now and then, I am sure we will have some more updates on how the story will develop. Kind of one of the last stories I'm going to leave with for this week was an interesting event happened with Pakistan, who has been having a number of escalating tensions with Afghanistan, and this has sort of finally escalated to the point where Pakistan has started striking targets inside of Afghanistan. This past week, the Taliban government reported that several jets killed at least 8 people, including 5 women and 3 children. It considers the action a gross violation of their territory, and despite Pakistan's claim that the targets were terrorists, this has led to an exchange of gunfire across the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. This is coming, certainly getting a bit worse by the week. There's been numerous reports of Pakistani soldiers being killed, and now this is kind of turning into a sort of cycle of revenge, and definitely not, don't project that going super great. There's been just kind of a rising anti-Afghani sentiment in Pakistan. Many of the refugees there have been getting deported back and sent back. They're not accepting, asylum from the Taliban government, and yet they go and bomb the government. So it's like there's really kind of an interesting situation going on. And then, kind of also note that, remember, India, who's the neighbor of Pakistan, has been having an increase in anti-Muslim sentiment generally. So you have Pakistan picking on Afghanistan, and then you have India, who's just kind of mad at everybody, and just kind of devolving into a bit of an ugly situation, for sure. So this is kind of the stories for the week. A lot of information. But yeah, thanks for hanging with me. Alrighty. Love you, fam. Bye.